George Strait has truly earned his spot as a contender for the title of King of Country Music. His journey to the top wasn't just handed to him. It's been built on years of talent, relentless hard work, and the kind of music that struck a chord with millions. Over 70 million records have been sold in the US alone, and when you include international sales, that number climbs past 12 million more. He's even the 12th best-selling album artist in US history. With stats like that, it's no wonder George Strait is considered one of the greatest musicians of all time. But being a country music legend doesn't mean his life has been all smooth sailing. While his professional career has been nothing short of iconic, George has faced his fair share of personal struggles. Some of these challenges have been heartbreakingly close to home, especially when it comes to his family. The story of his son shines a light on just how tough some of those moments have been. Born on May 18, 1952 in the small town of Poteet, Texas, George grew up in a community called Pearsall in southern Texas. His dad, John Strait, wasn't just a middle school maths teacher. He also ran a 2,000-acre family ranch that had been passed down through generations. Life wasn't always easy, though. When George was still a young boy in elementary school, his parents divorced. After that, he and his brother Buddy were raised by their father, navigating childhood on the ranch while dealing with the changes that come with a split family. George's dad took on the role of their main carer, and even as kids, George and his brother Buddy pitched in with the ranch work. Those early days taught them the values and grit that are such a big part of life in the rural West. When George was at Pearsall High School, he started dipping his toes into music. He joined a rock band called the Stoics, inspired by none other than the Beatles. Like many teens of that time, he spent hours soaking up their music along with tracks from other popular bands. Funny enough, George wasn't exactly a guitar wizard back then, but he still joined a few more rock bands during high school. Country music? It wasn't even on his radar yet. After finishing high school, George tied the knot with his high school sweetheart, Norma. Their wedding was a private affair, far from the spotlight. Later, George enrolled at Southwest Texas State University, but took a major detour in 1971 when he enlisted in the U.S. Army. It was during his time stationed in Hawaii that George started to explore music more seriously, both singing and strumming his guitar. It was there he discovered country music legends like Hank Williams, George Jones, and Merle Haggard. But the artist who really struck a chord with him was Bob Wills, known for his iconic Western swing style. By 1973, George had joined his very first country band on the Army base, marking the start of his journey into the genre that would one day make him a legend. While still serving in the military, George Strait started paving his way in music. After leaving the Army in 1975, he returned to Southwest Texas State University to finish a degree in agriculture, which he earned in 1979. It was during this time that George stumbled upon a flyer for a country band called Stony Ridge. He joined the group, eventually becoming their lead singer and renaming them to the Ace in the Hole Band. The band became regulars on the Texas music scene, playing clubs near the campus and even venturing out to spots as far away as Huntsville and Houston. Their growing popularity earned them the chance to open for big acts like the Texas Playboys. They also recorded a couple of George's original songs, including That Don't Change the Way I Feel About You and I Can't Go On Dying Like This, under a small Houston-based label called D Records. However, the songs didn't make much of a splash, and George continued working on his family's ranch during the day to make ends meet. Even though George kept performing with his band, breaking into the music industry wasn't easy. He didn't have many connections until his friend Irv Woy, who owned a local pub where the band often played, stepped in. Woy had ties to a major record label and managed to convince some Nashville insiders to come to Texas and watch George perform. While they loved the music, they ultimately decided not to sign him, thinking that the band's Western swing style wouldn't sell in the mainstream market. The big names in the music industry weren't too sure about George Strait's traditional country style. At the time, the market was leaning toward a more polished pop country vibe, and George's raw, authentic sound didn't quite fit the mold. Determined, George made trip after trip to Nashville, trying to land a record deal. But every single label turned him down for the same reason. His music wasn't what they thought the industry wanted. Frustrated by the lack of recognition, George seriously considered leaving the music scene altogether. Around this time, he got an offer to design cattle pens and was ready to take it. He even told his band he was stepping away from music, but his wife, Norma, stepped in and convinced him to give it one more year. And good thing she did. In February 1981, just as George was about to hang up his cowboy hat, he landed a record deal with MCA Records. It wasn't a full-blown contract, though. They started small, one song. If it performed well, there'd be talks of an album and a longer deal. That song was Unwound, and it hit the airwaves in 1981. The track quickly gained traction, climbing to the 6th spot on Billboard's Hot Country Songs chart. The success of Unwound prompted MCA to extend George's contract, officially launching his career as a professional musician. From there, things took off. George's solo career blossomed, and one of the best parts? The standout member of his ace-in-the-hole band stayed by his side, supporting him as he rose to stardom. Throughout the next decade, George Strait became a powerhouse in country music, releasing more than 12 albums, each one surpassing $1 million in sales. His journey into stardom began in 1981 with his debut album, Strait Country. It stood out from the crowd, breaking away from the pop country trend dominating the time, earning George widespread critical praise. In 1982, he released Straight from the Heart, which included his first #1 country hit, Foolhardy Memory. By the mid-'80s, George was a chart-topping machine, scoring 17 #1 hits, including 5 consecutive chart toppers between 1983 and 1984. These hits came from standout albums like Right or Wrong and Does Fort Worth Ever Cross Your Mind? In 1983, George also made his debut at the iconic Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, stepping in after Eddie Rabbitt fell ill. It was the start of a long-standing tradition. He has performed there more than 20 times, drawing over 1 million fans and selling out every show. By 1985, George's hard work was paying off in a big way. He won the Country Music Association's Best Male Vocalist Award and released his first Greatest Hits album. That same year, his album, Something Special, featuring the hit song The Chair, topped the charts. The accolades kept rolling in. In 1986, George won the CMA Male Vocalist of the Year award again and released his 4th #1 album. But while his career was hitting incredible highs, 1986 turned out to be a heartbreaking year for George and his wife, Norma. George and Norma had 2 children together. Their first child, a daughter named Jennifer, was born on October 6, 1972. In 1981, they welcomed their son, George Harvey Strait Jr., lovingly nicknamed Bubba. Tragically, in 1986, the family faced an unimaginable loss when 13-year-old Jennifer passed away in a car accident. She was a passenger in a vehicle driven by 18-year-old Gregory Wilson Allen from Staples, Texas. The crash occurred due to excessive speed and improper handling of the car, which caused it to flip. Jennifer, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, was partially ejected from the vehicle and died instantly. Following this heartbreaking event, George chose to step back from the spotlight. He avoided interviews and refrained from discussing Jennifer's passing for an entire year. Publicity wasn't a priority for him. His focus was on grieving privately with his family. Reflecting on that time, George said, "After the death of my daughter, I became even more private. I completely shut down everything. I didn't want to talk to anyone who wasn't close to me. I felt like nothing more serious could happen, so I chose to handle it this way." Despite the overwhelming sorrow, George found a way to continue performing. Music became a way for him to cope with the loss while honoring his daughter's memory. George kept creating music and hit an incredible milestone with 11 consecutive #1 songs, starting with Nobody in His Right Mind Would Have Left Her in 1986 and ending with Ace in the Hole in 1989. All these chart toppers came from albums that also reached the top spot on the country music charts. He made history with his album Oceanfront Property, which became the first country album to debut at #1. By the end of the 1980s, George was riding high, earning the CMA Entertainer of the Year award in 1989 and winning it again in 1990. That same year, he released his 10th studio album, Livin' It Up. 2 tracks from the album, Love Without End, Amen, and I've Come to Expect It From You, stayed at #1 for 5 weeks each. As the 1990s kicked off, George's success showed no signs of slowing down. In 1991, he released Chill of an Early Fall, another well-received album. Entertainment Weekly noted that this release showcased a fresh side of George, as he experimented with new styles while staying true to his roots. Songs like If I Know Me and You Know Me Better Than That became hits. However, his streak of 31 consecutive top 10 hits ended with his cover of Lovesick Blues, which peaked at number 24. Despite this, Chill of an Early Fall still climbed to number 4 on the charts, even though it ended his run of 8 consecutive number 1 albums. In 1992, George released the album Holding My Own. While it didn't have any number 1 hits, 2 of its songs reached the top 5. Later that year, George began his acting career with the film Pure Country, where he performed several of his well-known songs, including I Cross My Heart, Heartland, Where the Sidewalk Ends, and The King of Broken Hearts. In 1995, George released George Strait, the box set, which contained 4 discs and sold over 5 million copies. It became the best-selling box set in country music history. The 1990s saw George releasing several more successful albums, including Blue Clear Sky in 1996, Carrying Your Love With Me in 1997, and One Step at a Time in 1998. In 1999, he released Always Never the Same, which followed the success of Pure Country. It reached number 2 on the country charts and number 6 on the Billboard 200. Critics noted that by this point, George had a unique ability to turn even the most lighthearted material into a hit with his style and grace, though opinions on the album were mixed. Throughout the 1990s, George scored a total of 17 number 1 hits on the Billboard Country Airplay charts, solidifying his place as one of the most successful country artists of the time. His success continued into the new millennium with the release of his self-titled album George Strait in September 2000, which included hits like Go On, If It's Gonna Rain, and She Took the Wind from his sails. It was clear that George was still a major name in the music industry. In 2013, he released Troubadour, which went straight to the top of the country album charts. The album's first single, I Saw God Today, also hit the number 1 spot on the country charts. That year, George won 2 Grammy Awards, one for Album of the Year and the other for Single of the Year. In 2009, he was named Artist of the Decade by the Academy of Country Music and won another Grammy for his work on Troubadour. In September 2012, he announced that his Cowboy Rides Away tour would be his final one, timed to coincide with the release of his album Love Is Everything in May 2013. By then, George had racked up 60 number 1 hits, surpassing Conway Twitty's record of 40 number 1 songs on the Hot Country Songs chart. With this achievement, he set a new record for the most number 1 songs across any chart, in any genre of music. But it wasn't just about the number 1 hits. George was known for his unique tours, which featured festival-style arrangements and a 360-degree setup. In 2013, he won the Entertainer of the Year award from the Country Music Association for the 3rd time. For the second leg of his tour, starting on January 9, 2014, George was joined by an impressive lineup of artists, including Jason Aldean, Miranda Lambert, Little Big Town, Tim McGraw, and many others. On June 7, 2014, George Strait wrapped up his Cowboy Rides Away tour with a historic final performance at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. The concert drew 104,693 fans, setting a new record for the largest indoor concert in North America in 3 decades, surpassing the attendance of the Rolling Stones' 1981 show at the New Orleans Superdome. The event generated an incredible $194 million, marking the highest earnings ever recorded at a single country music concert. On June 15, 2024, George made history once again by performing in front of the largest crowd ever for a solo concert in the United States, with 111,905 fans at Kyle Field in College Station, Texas. This beat the previous record held by the Grateful Dead, who attracted 10,709 fans in New Jersey in 1977. It also surpassed the attendance at a Texas A&M football game held in 2014, which had 106,633 spectators. The fact that George was a genuine cowboy who was born and reared on his father's ranch was one of the reasons that fans were drawn to him in addition to his singing. In addition to his profession as a musician, George focused a considerable portion of his time on his own ranch in South Texas. There, he engaged in activities such as team roping, cattle raising, and horseback riding. His lifestyle as a cowboy gave a level of authenticity that emotionally resonated with his fans, further solidifying his iconic stature in both the country music and cowboy culture communities. Together with his brother Buddy, George Strait established the George Strait Team Roping Classic, which is considered to be one of the most important competitions in the sport of team roping. Despite the fact that George reared steers particularly for the event, his enthusiasm for ranching and rodeo was not motivated by the desire to make a profit. It was a deep-seated love for the way of life, a desire that was instilled in him by his father, who had fostered the same zeal for ranching and roping at the same time. This was something that George was especially excited to see his son, George Jr., who was lovingly referred to as Bubba, also having this interest. Together, they were responsible for managing the ranch, and Bubba, following in his father's footsteps, became an expert in team roping. In addition to that, Bubba went on to have a prosperous career in high school rodeos and became a member of the rodeo team at Texas A&M University. In subsequent years, he became a member of the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association, PRCA, where he began his career as a roper and participated in a variety of competitions, one of which was the George Strait Team Roping Classic. The 22nd iteration of the tournament took place in 2004. After a horrific accident in which he nearly severed his index finger during a roping event, Bubba was forced to take a sabbatical from competing. Unfortunately, this was so that he could continue to compete. With George Strait serving as the organizer of the Team Roping Classic for a period of 35 years before finally bringing the event to a stop in 2017, the Strait family has maintained a large presence in the world of rodeo. George acknowledged his pride in witnessing Bubba's success in the sport during an interview with Team Roping Journal. George was very happy to see Bubba succeed. It was the most amazing sensation in the world to watch Bubba win, and even just to compete, he said, and he described it as the greatest joy in the world. He said that the greatest joy came from watching his son fight. They had been fortunate enough to earn a couple of buckles together, which George believed to be one of his most significant accomplishments. Bubba Strait has been involved in the music industry and has made important contributions to his father's career, despite the fact that he prefers to remain out of the spotlight for the most part. Although Bubba was only a child at the time, his voice was featured in the song Heartland, which was the opening track for the film Pure Country, which was directed by George in 1992. During his younger years, he collaborated closely with George, contributing to the composition of songs such as Living for the Night and Out of Sight, Out of Mind, all of which were included on the album Twang, which was released in 2009. Over the course of his career, Bubba continued to work with his father on a number of albums, including Here for a Good Time, 2011, Love is Everything, 2013, Cold Beer Conversation, 2015, and Honky Tonk Time Machine, 2019. The fact that George himself acknowledged Bubba's significant contribution to his son's return to songwriting and expressed his pride in his son's growth as a songwriter was something that George himself acknowledged. It was said that Bubba had played a significant role in rekindling his own enthusiasm for writing music, and that working with him had been a great privilege for him. Over the course of his life, Bubba has accompanied George to a number of high-profile events, including the ceremony for the Country Music Hall of Fame medallion in 2007, the 44th Annual Academy of Country Music Awards in 2009, and the 50th Annual Country Music Awards in 2012. During the final performance of George's Cowboy Rides Away tour, which took place in Arlington, Texas in 2014, Bubba even joined his father on stage. They collaborated on a performance of George's song The Cowboy Rides Away, which turned out to be a unique and unforgettable moment between a father and his son. CMT broadcast a live concert special called George Strait, The Cowboy Rides Away, which included this performance as one of the performances that was captured. This led George to make the decision to end his career as a touring musician. Because he continues to derive a great deal of satisfaction from working with his father, Bubba Strait has no intention of ever ceasing to compose music for his father in the near future. His wife, Tamara Strait, who is a real estate agent, frequently posts images of the couple on Instagram, despite the fact that he does not use social media himself. When she was a silver dancer at a San Antonio Spurs game in 2005, Tamara and George had their first encounter with each other. After getting engaged in 2010, The couple went on to get married later that same year. There are two children that they have, George Harvey Strait II, who was born in 2012, and Jillian Louise Strait, who was born in 2016. The couple's son, Harvey, joined George on stage at the Houston Rodeo, where they played George's song, God and Country Music. Harvey was performing with his father. On Instagram, Tamara posted a picture of this moment. For the sixth game of the World Series, which took place in 2022, Harvey and his sister, along with their mother and grandma Norma, were present. It was during this game that George and Harvey made the play ball call. In addition, George noted that Harvey had played drums for a period of time and that he might be interested in playing the instrument again in the future, despite the fact that he is currently engaged in fishing, hunting, and baseball. In addition, George mentioned that his granddaughter has already sung a few songs, and despite the fact that it is too soon to speculate on their futures, he is committed to supporting them regardless of the path that they decide to choose. The journey that George Strait took from being a little boy in a tiny town in Texas to becoming a music superstar all over the world is one that exemplifies drive, passion, and perseverance. This is true even in the face of personal tragedies and difficulties in the business world. In spite of everything that was going on, he never wavered from his dreams. His grounded attitude and strong morals are shown in the tight relationship he has with his family, particularly with Bubba, to whom he is particularly close. In addition to his illustrious career, which has resulted in a multitude of successes that have topped the charts, George Strait has become a well-liked symbol of country music. He is frequently considered to be the legitimate monarch of the genre.